Hello whisky fans and welcome back. Today I'm going to start looking at the Tomatin core range, starting with the newbie of the range, Tomatin Double Cask. So yes, elephant in the room, this stuff is 40%, and if you look on the packaging it also says Mitfarbstoff, so there's some colouring in there. It is very much a consumer whisky, but it's a very affordable whisky too. And I do think that it kind of makes sense to start at the entry level. So Tomatin is not a whisky that I've reviewed on the channel before, maybe with the exception of a blind dram and an advent calendar. And Tomatin it markets itself rather curiously these days as the softer side of the Highlands. And I do think that's a little bit odd and a little bit anachronistic in today's whisky market where flavour is king and bold flavours are very fashionable. And it also begs the question, softer than what? Softer than other peated Highlanders? Or perhaps a softer style of sherry? Honestly, I think when they say that this stuff is the softer side of the Highlands, I think they're just implying that it's smooth, it's quality, there's no rough stuff. I'm going to show you a little close-up of the box before we get the bottle out and have a look at that too. I think, compared to the existing Tomatin core range products, like the Legacy, which we're probably all familiar with, and the Tomatin 12-year-old, the ubiquitous 12, I think that they've obviously gone in a more modern direction with this new double cask. And it is new. It's been out for probably just under 6 months, but I definitely think that they've gone for a clean, trendy, more modern, I think is the word, more modern presentation with this concentric pattern here, which is obviously meant to be wood grain, but also kind of a little dynamic swirl on there as well. I do think that I probably prefer the label on the bottle a little bit to the box. I think that that is pretty clean and classic and traditional, and that's something that I like. I do think that that is a nice old school label. There is a rear label as well, but it's one of those clear ones, so it's very hard to actually read it through the camera there. It's interesting that the logo of Tomatin seems to be this thing, which you can see a little bit more clearly on the box. And I wonder how many of you know what that is, because it's a little bit cryptic. It's a hog's head. Makes sense when you think about it. Whether you love it or not, I think that the fact that this has a box or not is a good thing if you like your boxes, but if you are big on cutting down on waste, it's probably a bit of a downside. But it has to be said that this is, you can get this stuff when it's on offer here in the UK for about £20, so it's kind of probably in the minority of whiskies at that price point that even have a box. As for Tomatin Distillery, Tomatin is actually a pretty big distillery. Even as far as Scottish distilleries go, they've been around for absolutely ages, and like a lot of the high output Scottish distilleries, almost all of their whisky disappears into blends. So even if you've never bought a bottle of Tomatin, you've probably had Tomatin. The double cask here is one of the new budget options. For quite a few years now, probably well over a decade, I think people in the UK will be very used to seeing this one, which is the Tomatin Legacy, which is the previous effort from Tomatin at coming up with a new, affordable, economically produced, no-age statement whisky. But it does seem, and I don't know that this is being discontinued, I would have thought it's not, because it's a very different thing, but it seems like in a lot of supermarkets here, in the UK at least, it seems like this new Tomatin double cask, which comes in at an even lower price point a lot of the time, does seem to be replacing the Legacy on a lot of shelves. Now, the previous NAS Legacy, with that one compared to the flagship 12, they dropped the sherry casks and the age statement, and they replaced those sherry casks with virgin oak instead. With the new double cask, we get the sherry back, but we lose the age statement, and we also lose 3% ABV compared to the 12-year-old and the Legacy. Still, on offer in the UK supermarkets, this stuff sits at about £22, which is very cheap. So let's get some in the glass and see if it's not only cheap, but good value. Because those things are not always the same. Quite often not. So this is the unnatural colour that they've chosen to give us. Using my White Peaks glass today. Tomatin double cask on the nose. Very sweet, lots of caramel, quite typical caramelly, robust Highland style, sweet, faintly herbal too. At times, the herbal accents on this, which it has to be said are quite unique, they have a little bit of a hint of Becherovka about them, which is not my favourite thing in the world. I don't think it's many people's favourite thing, but it's an interesting little accent. And you can really tell that the sherry is back in this one. There is a strong floral sherry character here, which actually reminds me a little bit of like a floral, meaty, Palo Cortado type sherry. So a dry, grown-up big boy sherry, but also quite an odd type of sherry that I don't think is very common in whiskey. At least, certainly not a whiskey at this price point. Definitely some dry sherry in there. Lots of caramel. And that fruity tomatin spirit all the way through, with some passion fruit and apple, elderflower cordial, and a little bit of honey on the nose. A little bit of a nuttiness, like a sesame seed, sesame snap note. Lots of caramel and a little bit of spicy mustard. Honestly, the nose on this is really not what I expected. This one was a big surprise for me. I did not expect this from an economically produced NAS £20 whiskey. There's quite a lot going on here. Yes, it's 40%. Yes, it's hampered. I'm going to avoid the word cheap, but it is economically produced budget whiskey. But there is, despite that low price point, a lot going on in this. That nose is really eccentric and quite unique, which is very unexpected at this price point. It's just got real character. I really came in expecting little to nothing from this one, and I was really pleasantly surprised. More than that, not just surprised, the character and unique aromas on this one, I'm not just surprised, but intrigued. Let's see if the palate can keep up. On the palate, more of that floral, slightly earthy and meaty sherry. There is a little bit of bitterness in there, which probably tells you that this is a youngish whiskey. I don't think it's immature, but you can tell that it is a young, affordable whiskey, as you would expect. But that sherry is really rather unique and really quite nice. Lovely dry sherry, but not bitter at all. It hasn't got those textbook kind of Fino Dry Oloroso, dry, bitter European oak notes. It hasn't got that. It's quite a lot more laid back and a lot more easygoing. I think that this one is a whiskey that's going to appeal to a lot of people. It has enough interest and it's affordable enough that I think that it's a really fun and unusual little dram. And I think it's also going to appeal to inexperienced whiskey fans or people that are just getting into the hobby. Very unusual sherry. It's not that proper traditional dry sherry, but it's also not a super sweet flavour dipped American oak thing either. It's certainly got the character of actual dry sherry, and as I said before, bizarrely it really reminds me of like a cross between a dry Fino and a Palo Cortado, with some really quirky floral and meaty notes. Got some really nice sweet bourbon notes in there as well, and I think probably synergizing with a little bit of that youth is some really nice grassy, rye, oak spice type vibes, with a little bit of spicy, grassy pepperiness. And part of me does wonder if there's some shaved and recharred oak in here. It's not got that obvious STR profile, which I'm really not a fan of, but it does feel a little bit engineered and a little bit modern, reconditioned casks perhaps, but in my opinion done fairly well. Lots of sweet and sour fruitiness on this one as well, and I know that a lot of that is coming from the Tomatin spirit, because Tomatin, it has to be said, is a really, really fruity, bold and juicy distillate, getting notes of gooseberry and a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg, as well as some apple. I would say that it doesn't have massive staying power mid-palate, and even if you hold it on your tongue for quite a long time to really make the most of those flavours, it still runs out of steam if you hold it a little bit too long. But I think that early on, it's got a lot going for it, and there's some really interesting flavours in this. Let's have one more sip and look at the finish. Again, lots of that slightly oddball sherry on the finish, with that surprising floral meatiness, getting some notes of stewed tea as well, but that Palo Cortado character, and I suspect that they're probably not using Palo Cortado for this, and I do wonder if it's like a combination of like a dry sherry and maybe some rye casks, something just tweaking that profile a little bit. But that eccentric character keeps coming back again and again, and it's something that I really enjoy. And honestly, I think, considering that this stuff is a bare minimum 40%, I think that it has an excellent finish, excellent and interesting sherry, and it's just so different to what we normally get, which in today's whiskey market of lots of repetition, and I think a lot of us are kind of running out of novelty to experience, I think that this one is really good value for money in the fact that it shows me something which is not quite ordinary. So overall, what do we have here with this Tomatin double cask? It is a classic bourbon and sherry maturation, but very well done with a slightly different twist. And I think that that slightly unusual sherry works really, really well with Tomatin's tart, fruity spirit. And I think that the price point that this stuff sells for, which the undiscounted price is quite unfriendly, not very appealing, but you get this on Club Card discount, other supermarkets exist, at £20 to £25, and I think that's really good value. I think that it beats most of the other options at that price point, and I think it's well worth a look if you're looking for a cheap bottle of whiskey. Superb value. I don't know what they've done to get this down to that low price point, especially being quite a bit cheaper than the 12-year-old. Obviously, aside from lowering the ABV, my guess would be perhaps more refill casks in the mix, which, honestly, if anything, I think it just does a really good job of showing a clearer, more transparent side of the sherry and that spirit, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. And it must be said that comparing this, getting ahead of myself here, because I will review this one as well, but comparing this to the slightly more expensive Tomatin Legacy, I actually find myself preferring this new one. And I think more than that, I think that this Tomatin double cask, because it is that bourbon and sherry maturation and not the virgin oak, I think it's probably a better introduction to the Tomatin core range as well. It represents both the distiller and the sherry really well. It's probably more like the rest of the Tomatin range, whereas I think Legacy, as good as it is, and it is good, it's just a bit of an anomaly in the Tomatin core range. And yes, compared to the Tomatin 12, which I will also review, that sherry is different for sure, because I think that the sherry in the Tomatin 12 is more of a textbook double maturation. But I don't think that the sherry in this new double cask is drastically less in intensity or quality when you're comparing it to the 12. I actually bought this one not expecting anything at all. I was after a cheap bottle of whiskey for mixing, maybe for putting with ice, or for guests, things like that. It was not something that I had high hopes for, and I didn't intend to review it. I didn't think it was worth anyone's time. But I've really changed my mind, and I keep being surprised by this one. I think that for the low price and the low ABV, because you know I hate my low ABVs, I think this one does an excellent job. a proper introduction to sherry cask whisky with a quirky edge. So what else can we recommend if you like this one, or who might this appeal to? Like, what sort of thing might people like who would appreciate this? I think if you like this, then check out the Isle of Raasay for that grassy character for profile, because there's definitely some overlap there, and the Raasay is generally a better presentation. Or probably Glengarry as well. Glengarry is another one that has some of that slightly oddball and interesting character. But the downside is that both of those, the Raasay and the Glengarry, they're both going to cost you significantly more than a bottle of this. For the money, I think that Tomatin Double Cask is an excellent little curveball dram with much more than meets the eye. And while it's clearly an economy production with limited intensity, it's really not that limited, and it's really grown on me. Very different, very enjoyable, and highly recommended as a cheap dram. Let me know what you think if you've had this one, or does it just put you off? The presentation, physical, or the presentation of the juice in the bottle, does that mean that you're probably not likely to try this one? Because if that's the case, if you're limited to what whiskey you consume, then maybe this isn't something for you. But I do think that it's worth a look. I've been really enjoying it. And if I want another cheap bottle of whiskey for guests or just relaxing after work, this one's going to be on the shortlist. Let me know what you think. Thanks for joining me, and cheers.